So welcome everybody. For some people in the States, it's a holiday, President's Day, and it's Black History Month, Women's History, all kinds of different commemorations. And there are probably different holidays that are happening in other parts of the world also. So we're very, very happy to greet you. And I don't think Melinda's going to be able to be here today, but we're all going to welcome each other. And I'm very, very delighted to have Joe with us this morning. It's going to be a special treat. He's talking about one of my very favorite subjects. So Joe is part of our community empowerment leadership group and made us the original website for the community empowerment group that Jim has refurbished and carried forward. And and Joe is very experienced and has just a beautiful aesthetic for technology. And you can see his recent trip behind him to the Antarctica, and he may say something about that. But Joe is a real inspiration for us and brings a lot of wisdom and passion to our work. I've known you for a long time now, Joe, originally from Joan Clagsburn's, when I would go and teach there in Boston. So welcome. There's a little introductory statement that Joe has, and you tell us when you're ready for that, and we'll have Katerina read it for us.
Okay, I'm ready. I'm ready.
Joe has been focusing for 15 years so I'm very honored to be here today. It's early in the morning. I'm on the west coast of Canada, and Joe is the president on the board of directors of the Bio-Spiritual Focusing Institute.
Right.
And he has been teaching there for 9 years as a master teacher, as well as spiritual director for 15 years, and the author of several books on grief, spirituality, and leaving a life legacy.
Good. Well, thank you. Thank you.
Well, I didn't know some of those things. Maybe you could put the names of the books in the chat for us. And
at the end of the session, I'll put them in.
That's great. I'm going to get them today.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to share my screen, and I am going to lead folks in what I'd like to do is begin with a brief attunement and help folks transition from getting here to being here. So let me simply invite all of you to get comfortable in the chair that you're sitting in, or however your position there. Just get comfortable and allow your awareness to focus on your breathing, just your breathing. Notice the inflow and the outflow of your breath. And as you do so, let your body release any tension that it might have. Feel your chest rise and fall with your breath. There's no place to go, nothing to be, nothing to do. Just allow yourself to focus on your breathing. If thoughts come to mind, simply set them aside. Coming back again and again to your breath. And as you're focused on your breathing, I invite you now to go inside and ask the question or make the statement, I feel fine, and see what comes. Go inside and make the statement, I feel fine, or I feel wonderful, and see what comes in response to that. I want you to notice how your body is carrying all of that. Maybe many things have come forward. Just notice, how is your body carrying all of that? See if there's a word or a gesture that might capture how your body's holding all of that. Again, checking to see what's the whole feel of that in your body. And as you hold all of that, ask your body, what would it feel like inside if I could put this burden or these burdens down? If I could release them, what would I feel like inside? Notice the whole feel of that in your body now. What would it feel like if I could put all of that down? If I could release all of that? What would be the sense of that? What would be the whole feel of that? Asking inside. And see if there's a word, an image, or a gesture that matches or acts like a handle for that sense. Is there a way to describe this place? Now, not letting your mind answer the question first, ask inside, what's needed to have this freedom, or what might be for me a small step to have more of this in my life? And give your body time to answer that question. What might be a small step to have more of this in my life? take a few moments to welcome and to be grateful for what has come. And when you're ready, open your eyes and return to this group. Perhaps making a note to jot down anything that came from this reflection, this experience, maybe capturing it in a journal or maybe drawing a picture of it. Okay, I think everyone's back, although I can't see anybody because I've got screen sharing here. So I'm going to continue with the presentation. And the presentation today is really an invitation to see and understand focusing from a wider perspective than just a therapeutic tool, seeing it much more than that. And I'm going to be taking a biospiritual approach to this, and I call it bringing a spiritual context, not the spiritual context, but a spiritual context within which to understand the dynamics of the focusing flow and the companion relationship. All right. So, and again, I'm emphasizing, you notice I've got the article A with quotation marks around it. I make that distinction because I'm not saying this is the spiritual context that you must have. I'm saying it is one of perhaps many, but it is an invitation to look at it from this perspective. So I have two questions for you to ponder. And as I ask these questions, I encourage you to scribble down an answer. And we'll be talking about this a little later at the end of the presentation. So here's the first question. I'm going to presume that the majority of you, if not all, have been focusing. So my question for you is, what gives rise to your felt senses? Ask yourself, what gives rise to my felt senses? Where do they come from? You know, I have my life experiences and my body responds to that. I get these felt senses. Where do they come from? Where do they come from? So take a minute just to think about that. Where would you say, if someone said to you, where do these felt senses come from? How do they originate? What gives rise? And then the second question is, what brings my felt shift? In other words, I have these felt senses and I interact with them, and then I get a felt shift. What makes that felt shift happen? What makes that felt shift happen? So take a few moments. Even if it's to write down, I don't know. It's a mystery. This is Jean's answer to the felt shift question. And let me explain the history behind this. Back in the early 70s, when Jean was beginning to spread his knowledge about focusing, he moved to New York City And it was there that Fathers Peter Campbell and Ed McMahon went to visit him because they had read his material and were really thrilled with what they read, but they needed to talk to him directly. And so they arrived at his apartment in New York City that he had just moved into. There were still crates on the floor. And they knocked on the door. Gene opens the door and he's stunned because there are these two priests with their Roman collars on standing at his doorway. Gene invites them in and he says to them, "Give me a few minutes just to get a felt sense." And he basically needed to clear a space because he was so surprised. And so they had a polite discussion for a little bit. And then Father Ed said, "Look, we really need just one question answered. And that one question is, does the felt sense cause the felt shift? Does the felt sense cause the felt shift?" And Gene thought for a little bit, and his reply was, "It's what you guys call grace," which is interesting. Grace means that it comes from the beyond. It comes from a source of love and caring to free up the spirit, to help this life move forward. So he said to them, "It's what you guys call grace." Now, it's interesting, in his first edition to his book, Focusing, Gene actually uses the word grace. But in the second edition and all subsequent editions, he changed the word to gift because he felt that if he used the word grace, he'd lose 50% of the folks who might be interested in learning focusing. And he was smart enough to do that. And that was a blessing in a lot of ways. So let me frame this context that I'm talking about. From a biospiritual perspective, we take what's called a panentheistic understanding of reality. What that means is that we look at the divine, or whatever you want to call it, and this is one of the things about the divine, it makes it difficult. The divine is transcendent. It's beyond any description. The minute I go to define the divine or the more or life or love or the larger system, whatever it might be, that's not it. It's always beyond that. It's beyond that description. If you're curious about this, I invite you to take a look at some of the videos that are online where Gene describes what he calls his cat theology. And it's wonderfully done. But again, it's beyond description. However, at the same time that it's transcendent, the divine is seen as an immanent presence. In other words, there's no place anywhere that the divine isn't. What that means is that we as creatures are immersed in the more or the divine or life or love or the larger system. We're immersed in it. It's like fish in the sea. We're immersed in it. And because of this, our bodies are the bridge to that immersion and interaction. Our bodies are wired for connection. Now, this is not something that's come up since 1970. This immanent experience, or I'm sorry, the experience of this presence has been around a long time. We can go back to 400 BCE and to the Cretan philosopher Epiphanes, who said, the God is the one in whom we live, move, and have our being. And if you look at the early definitions of the word consolation, it's really meant awareness of the heart. Or if you look at mystics traditions in Eastern Orthodox or Sufi or Celtic mystics, they talk about this, what we would define as a focusing interaction, as inner knowledge impregnated by love. Very powerful, very, very powerful. And it attempts to describe the undescribable. Now, traditionally, mysticism has been conceived as a spiritual quest for union with the absolute, the infinite, with God, and a perception of oneness with everything. So it's an immersion, a connection to that which is beyond us. But the problem is that we can't use our minds to reach a mystical experience, just like we can't use our minds to find love, to create love, just like we can't use our minds to create a felt sense. We have to let our bodies do that. It's important to understand that our mind's operating system is one of separation. In other words, I'm here, you're there. My mind uses that separation of, objectifying everyone as a way to navigate through things. I'd love the example of the metaphor of our minds as an old typewriter. It does its job very, very well, but it can't navigate the internet. It doesn't have the operating system. I recently heard a presenter talk about the mind is Newtonian and the body is quantum. And I think that's quite correct. We can't perceive unity with the mind that relies on separation. Can't conceive oneness when you got a mind that divides everything. It's only through the body that we encounter that which is beyond us. So focusing becomes the doorway to that. So what I'd like to propose today is a broader understanding of mysticism. I'd like to propose mysticism as the experiencing of a creative personal interaction with that which is beyond us, yet intimately and creatively present. So what that means is that in focusing, when we interact with a felt sense, we are touching into and interacting with this energized wisdom presence within each of us. And it's a loving presence. It wants life to move forward. As a great focusing teacher once said, and I quote Lynn Preston here, it's the nature of life to want more life. In focusing, we experience the growing intimate edge where life is calling us forward. Now, historically, mysticism is thought to be the domain of saints and deep meditators, but any expression of it is always metaphorical in nature. You can't define awe. Like I can't describe for you the experience of standing on a boat in Antarctica and looking at the massive icebergs that were there. I can't do that. I can't explain the experience because my words aren't it the minute I say them. Mystical experiences are also not located in a unique place, time, object, or person. It's our interaction with an energized presence. And it's not a passive interaction because that interaction results in felt shifts. If you look at the classic Gene statement about focusing, where he said your physically felt body is in fact part of a gigantic system of here and other places now and other times, you and other people. In fact, the whole universe, the sense of being bodily alive in a vast system is the body as it's felt from the inside. That, my friends, is a mystical moment. Now, what makes all of this happen, or makes it possible to happen, it's the context of what in biospirituality we would call a caring presence and embedded with self-compassion. A lot of folks will talk about a focusing attitude, which means that I apply something from my mind. I always add more to that. I say, no, this caring presence is a visceral caring. It's an in the gut caring of compassion and non-judgment that enables that which is darkest and most fearful within us to transform into loving friends that contain the deepest insights into the forward movement, the spiritual growth, and the transformation of one's life. So if you think about it, the opportunity to have a balance between the cognitive and experiential aspects of one's spirituality. And I define spirituality as where you ground yourself in terms of your interaction with the more. Essentially, I'm talking about a whole body spirituality. And I see focusing as a potential holy ground, or what some folks would call a thin place. But ultimately, to quote Father Ed, we're looking, when we do focusing, we're talking about mysticism for the millions. It's a global spirituality through focusing, because it is a capability that people all over the world have. Now, this interaction, this focusing interaction, to really find another ground from which to see, a solid ground from which to step, and from which to speak again in a different way, a clear, rested, and embodied voice. This is a mystical interaction. Now, years ago, my teenage daughter was killed in an automobile accident. And I was torn with grief. I don't think there's a deeper grief in one's life, except perhaps for the loss of a spouse. But in particular, the loss of a child is huge. And for more than a year, I struggled. And asking myself the question, what do I do with this grief? I'm a guy. I fix things. And I struggled with that for more than a year. And it was impacting my life, my decision-making, my relationship with my friends, my wife, my work was impacting me. And I knew that I had to do something. So one day I sat down and I actually did some focusing. And I allowed myself to go inside and hold the felt sense of all that my grief had. And as I did that, as I held that, eventually what came was a memory of my last minutes with my daughter, where I kissed her and hugged her and told her that I loved her, that she was special in my life. And as I held that image, there were two felt shifts that came. The first felt shift was an understanding that my grief was going to be forever. Because I realized at that point that it was my love for my daughter that was giving my grief all of its energy. So as long as my love for my daughter remained, I would grieve her loss. But at the same time, a more powerful felt shift came, in that I realized that for more than a year, I had been asking the wrong question. Instead of asking, what do I do with this grief? I could now ask, what do I do with this love? Whereas there is no answer to the what can I do with this grief, or how can I fix it? There are a lot of answers to what do I do with this love? What can I do with this love? And there are a lot of answers to that. Now, that as a experience of grace, of interaction between myself, felt sense, evolving into a felt shift, that's an experience, a mystical moment arising out of grief. You know, people think mystics is all joy and happiness and everything else, but certainly that gave me a place to stand so that my life could move forward, so that the grief could remain, but my life could move forward. So it becomes very, very powerful. So how does focusing help spiritual development? From my point of view, it supports the habit of noticing and nurturing the body's role, this connection that it offers. It provides access to the felt senses that lead me to interact with the wisdom within me. And as a result, it also, in addition to providing the felt shifts, also fosters a passive, how I listen, and active, how I respond with compassion in all of my relationships. So it's not just a personal thing, it flows out to my interactions with everyone else. And so from a biospiritual perspective, the habit of felt sensing becomes a mystical practice. So as a biospiritual advocate, we ritualize our daily focusing. In the morning, midday, evening, we pause. Or at particular moments, if we become aware of a felt sense during the day, we pause. And we ask the question, what in my body wants my caring awareness right now? And we go through the biospiritual flow of noticing what's there, being with the felt sense with caring presence, and nurturing what comes. And going through the focusing process in that way. Now, it's a practice, not a perfect. We don't do this, I don't do it every day, and there are times I miss. But essentially what it is the opportunity for everyday mysticism. Father Ed's quote here, accessing the divine. It's a change in perspective, habit, and experience centers upon the presence of our God appearing not as some object of awareness, but as a graced presence unfolding from within our interacting relationships with life. Not looking at God, but discovering your being within God. Another way to look at it, I'll quote Joan Claxburn here. I see spirituality as a state of consciousness, a way of seeing the world that provides a sense of unity and consolation. It is that realm of the timeless that can spontaneously inspire us, comfort us, release us, heal us, fill us with awe, peace, and joy. It is a state of being in which we are seamlessly joined to a larger, interconnected field that is, in that moment, palpable and alive. A spiritual awareness gives meaning to our lives, validating our existence. That, my friends, is a mystical experience. So with that, I'm going to stop at this point. I've talked too much already. So let's open it up for questions or reflections or comments or whatever you'd like to share at this point or discuss among yourselves.
Well, Joe, I guess I'll start. This is an essay, and I want to thank you for your presentation. It was very heartfelt. And I started to think of the first time I bumped into that book, the Biospirituality book by Peter. I think it was written in 1997.
Yes.
It was Beyond Genlin. It was one of the first books that I read. And I had a deep connection to that book. So when I saw you were presenting, it was like, I don't know. It brought some, when you said for us to think about, you said something that really resonated with me. When I woke up this morning, I had a sense of gratitude, and I started to reflect on where this beautiful, grounded gratitude flow was coming from. And I connected it to this movie I watched last night, which is not a movie of joy. It's about Alzheimer's, actually. It's called Still Alice.
Yes.
But it was so beautifully presented in all its pain that it gave me a profound understanding. My stepmom passed away because of Alzheimer's, so I loved her deeply, and I always treated her as if she was still herself talking about things until it couldn't be. But to watch Still Alice, it kind of brought me to a place of strange calmness. It was very interesting, and I'm still trying to process that. Something that you asked us maybe make me write that sense of gratitude that I felt over something that was not so calming, but you can understand you can never understand what shifts something in you. You know, things happen, they sudden shift, and you're like, whoa, I'm shifting over that. How can that be? So I've been trying to ponder on it. So your presentation is so coincidental to me.
Yeah, in biospirituality, we call that the felt shift the physical experience of grace. It's like, whoa, where did that come from? Where did that come from? So that's very powerful. And also you pointed out another very important factor, and that is that felt shifts don't make things go away, but they allow us to stand in a different place that enables us to have our life move forward. So like you said, you know, Alzheimer's, it's a terrible disease, but I've got a calm. I can stand in a different place. My life can move forward, and Alzheimer's is still there, but my life can move forward. And that's so very powerful. That's grace.
Hi, I'm Steph. Hi, Joe.
Hi, Steph.
Thank you so much. This really brought up a lot for me because my dad introduced me to meditation when I was 8 years old, and I didn't realize that I was using it to run away from unbearable reality. And I ended up going to India on a spiritual path, having children, going through the whole thing until I hit a wall, like a major wall, and then ended up in recovery. And so here I am with this immense pain, but also these tools that I received. And I didn't realize that starting 25 years ago, I started focusing because I was using that spiritual presence that I had built up as sort of a soft place to fall for what was coming up within me. And so as you're speaking, this is what I'm reminded of. And then my good friend Lenore sort of introduced me to this a few years ago, and I'm like, oh my God, this is what I was doing. And I didn't even know it was focusing. So you so beautifully articulated it. I'm so grateful for this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Joe, this is BJ. Golly, first, thank you so much for the presentation with words on a slideshow that we can go back and look at. Almost always when I get a presentation from you about things that we can talk about, your sentences, your selection of materials, it is so dense and so thorough, and just it reminds me of Handel talking about the Messiah, that he just opened his heart and it all poured in all at once. Well, it all may pour in all at once, but it takes a hell of a long time to get it into words and write it down. So first of all, I just want to thank you for that, and to say the words are stultifying, stopping, stymieing, because I'm trying to get the words in my mind, and somehow that shifts me away from that experience of awe that you talk about. And what came to me just now, the thing I want to share, is in the same spirit of the early church, the notion of Lectio Divina. And we were introduced to it in silent eating, convent style, not talking at all, but while we're eating, having something considered sacred literature read to us, and read twice. And then we were to go away and have an hour of silent reflection on that few words of something considered essential, like any one of your slides could be, and then to sit with it. And we all do that differently, but to just sit with it and consume those very few words. And then after that hour, maybe write something down, maybe an image comes, and then go and share it with somebody. And I just want to say I've used that practice trying to consume many of the world's ideologies, sacred text. And I do the same with your work. I'm just so thankful that you've written it down for us today, and hope other people will join me in having an hour. Take one of those slides, that quote by Joan, some of those quotes by Lynn and Jean, they hold the mystery that's there for us. But we have to be willing to do, as you said, the practice, or it's all just in the mind. And it's like, oh, that was interesting. And then we go on. But to get the awe, like these other folks have been talking about, you just got to sit with it, either the image or the words themselves. So I've said enough. Just want to say thank you again.
Thank you, BJ. Thank you.
I also feel very grateful, Joe, for your presentation, and everything that you said, sort of something came alive in me. Oh, yes. Where does that come from? What is it to live within this larger, gigantic system that Gene would always point out the window or out the door, the whatever it is, he would say,
Yeah.
that we're living within. And I think it will be a long time that I'll just sort of go back to different things that you've said and nourish myself with them.
Yeah.
Joe, I have the same feeling. It's like your presentation was so wonderful. It was like I wanted to stop and pause at each phrase and take it in and remain there. So I'm glad that this is being recorded to go back to it, because it was of such richness. As BJ was saying, we could remain with each one of your slides and pause there. And what was happening to me as I was listening was there were more questions than answers. You posed questions, and each one of them posed more questions. So and it's so difficult to put those answers into words, because once we put them into words, it's so on that other level of sensing and experiencing, and then also I have this feeling that wonderful phrase, Gentlin's description of the body, was a perfect one of the perfect answers for me, because it's the body, but the body being all of that, being that vast system. So it's just the feeling there and the essence and being in contact with all of that. Thank you, Joe.
Yeah, one of the main points that I wanted to make is to make an invitation to think about our focusing and this whole thing of the body being part of it as a mystical interaction, as opposed to, the traditional thinking about mystics, some monk, some place in some cave. No, this is more alive. I'm not going to go to a cave, because frankly, I believe that if I go to a cave, I'm going to find myself. I could go to India, I still find myself. It's like my body's coming with me. So the idea here is to just invite you to think about all of this in a wider perspective, and how powerful this could be. Very, very powerful.
Hi, Joe.
Hi,
Here
Paul.
we are. Hi. I hope that I'm really excited about all of the insights and, just like signposts, just, and to think of them or reflect on them. And hi, BJ, you mentioned about sitting quietly and reflecting, so that one of them, like the mind is Newtonian and the body is quantum, so I was thinking, sorry for your loss of your daughter in the body mind, but the quantum we don't lose, so it's really just even the understanding that love transcends all of that. And just to put it in context of sort of now, I was listening to Michael Murphy and the Paradigm Wars, he was building communities, Estlin, negotiating communities while developing as individuals. So again, it's like that felt sense of was having courage to trust our word, our voice. I have some idea that we have an awful prejudice against being human. Really, the ultimate, and that we can't really know ourselves, which might be the mystical God, without actually hearing our voice. And I think that's the thing in focusing, is the felt sense of putting into words or making explicit what is implicit. So I'm so grateful for that, and the treat that we might have it on slides after. So really grateful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So, Joe, you spoke of mysticism in everyday life, and the everyday is like everyone, every person, every being, every project. In 2011, I was assisting Father Peter Campbell at the International Focusing Conference. So I carried his coat, I carried his book, and he was there greeting everyone. So there was a kind of synergy, might be the name. Everyone in that great big hall was vibrant, and it was like a big painting, almost like your sky and ocean behind you.
Before we go into breakout rooms, I have a little breakout exercise. I'd like to just make a comment based on some of the things I heard shared here over the past few minutes. I do a lot of work in interfaith relations, trying to help folks in different denominations, different religions, different traditions to talk to one another. And one of the greatest struggles for me is to work with all of these folks in the current paradigm of interfaith relationships, which means we talk to one another, we discuss our similarities, we discuss our differences, and it's all in here, it's all up in the head. And what I really try to do when I can is introduce this concept of focusing, because focusing is non-denominational, it's non-traditional, it's not, it's a capacity that we all have. And it's the one thing that can unify us. And as we encounter that which is beyond us, we try to articulate that, and that articulation over time takes the form of religions or traditions or practices, whatever it might take. That it takes that form, and of course there's many different ways to try to define this, but it's all head stuff. It's where the real unity is, and it's there. We all carry it, is in the body. And fundamentally, it's all part of believing in the abundance of life, and I think that's so powerful.
Welcome back, everybody. Sorry, I forgot that I was muted there. So let's take a couple of breaths together and Just see what wants to be shared. I always like that way that we say in focusing, instead of what you want to share, what wants to be shared. It has a life of its own.
I want to share what I shared. I mean, no, anyhow, all those words that are like coming into like, okay. Just take a moment. So yes, I want to share the crux of the shift for me in this moment of awe that I described was my two lovely caring persons in my breakout room. It's like this grieving grief, grieving pain. From grieving pain, someone very close to me that died recently, to releasing grief, to a grief that has a letting go in it, a grief that has some peace in it. The grief is there, but it's not gripping and grasping, and I'm not grasping at that person or at that them not being there, and or that I lose all the losses. So thank you for this moment.
Thank you.
I would like to share something very short, because with this lovely group that we shared, somebody used the word, we tend to forget. And I think what we are doing here is remembering. And I love these moments of remembering. It's like coming back to what's really important, to what's really the essence. And as you said, Joe, at one moment you said, well, I'm not focusing all the time. I'm not doing this all the time. I wish I were. There are moments that I'm not. And there are moments that I'm not doing that. But it's so precious when, and I need to be reminded. So these moments and these gatherings are so precious because we are being reminded that there's so much more.
Thank you. Thank you. I did share something with the group I was with. It's a practice that we teach when we teach biospiritual focusing. We call it the 45-second rule. And essentially what it is that if you're companioning a focuser and the focuser experiences a felt shift, you invite the focuser to savor the felt shift, to stay with the felt shift for more than 45 seconds. And the reason for that is that the neuroscientists tell us that negative experiences go into long-term memory immediately. Positive experiences go into short-term memory. So we forget them very quickly. So if I said, what was a good thing that happened 2 weeks ago? It's very hard to tell me what that was. But if I said, tell me a terrible thing that happened 2 weeks ago, you could probably tell me. But the neuroscientists figured out that if you hold the positive experience for more than 30 seconds, it goes into long-term memory. So we have a thing called the 45-second rule, encouraging people to stay with whatever they're holding for that period of time. So it means that maybe you can go back and remember, as opposed to saying, oh my gosh, I've been focusing a long time. I can't think of a felt shift. They're not there, and that's a challenge.
Right. I just want to say that I do that by having a journal that I write down just every day, something that felt forward moving. tiniest thing. And I just do that as a practice in the morning.
Right. Another way of doing that is, you know, in Buddhism and other things, we call it mindfulness, and just really being present and mindful. And you kind of automatically take a minute to be with things, like because you're being mindful, like, wow, I'm here with this, right? I know, I love the practice.
Joe, thanks very much. This was really a beautiful time. And the word that I'm taking away from today about the felt shift is redemptive. Your beautiful sharing of that focusing experience brought that word so strongly, and yeah, it really fits for some focusing experiences I've had. And it feels like a good word to think about the felt shift, its potential. Thank you.
Would you say what that word means to you? Because it's a word that has a lot of mystery about it. Some people find it troublesome. Some people find it beautiful and renewable. And I wanted to know what it means to you.
Oh, I love that word. The best way that perhaps I can explain, I don't know if any of you know Frida from Reichmann's book called To Redeem One Person is to Redeem the World. Yeah, the word redeem, to me, it means something like have something good to go forward with, to kind of unearth the best that there is to unearth, and to have that carry you forth. So for me, redemptive is a very it's a kind of experience I want to have.
It's like salvaging or saving.
Saving is the word that came up for me.
Yes.
That's the word
Like
that came up.
people who dive on ancient shipwrecks and you know, retrieve and salvage precious treasures. Yeah, that's kind of what it evokes for me.
Right.
Thank you.
But the other thing that comes up for me is it's not about necessarily changing. Like when you bring up salvage, for instance, you appreciate it as it is. So just being there to see the worth, right? Not necessarily change, I think, right?
To see the worth. I like that.
Pam, I'd like to say what came in me as you were speaking. I could see something in the natural world, an acorn or a seed, or me is something like in an egg. And as you were talking, it was like, or a dragonfly under the water and then changing it above the water. It was like not changing into something different, but opening further, the way things in the natural world just open, and there's more and there's more and there's more. I really felt that in your words about redemption. Beautiful.
Thank you. That's lovely. That's good to hear you say that. Feels like a lovely kind of reflection.
And our focusing reflection is like that. This the more and more and more of what's being expressed.
Yeah.
Okay, I think it's time for Dorothy's poem.
Okay.
So thank you so very much.
Thank you, Joe. Right, thank you.
Thank you. So, thank you, Joe. Joe is giving us an old friend, this poem here that I know you'll recognize, by Rumi. That's so fitting. The Guest House. This being human is a guest house. Every morning, a new arrival, a joy, a depression, a meanness. Some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all. Even if they're a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house, empty it of its furniture, still treat each guest honorably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice, meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whoever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond.
Thank you so much, Dorothy. It certainly speaks to everything that we've been reflecting on this morning. So hope you have a wonderful week. We're going to hear from Charlotte next Monday. And for those of you who have the day off today, enjoy it very much, and we'll see you next week.